to be here, and there's 5 coins over there, and there are some little prayer books that are Padre Pio prayer books, and then wristbands for the kids to take it. And what we decided to do, just a few months ago, is to run a little video ahead of time so you get to see Padre Pio. It'll be his last mass before he dies, but at least you'll be able to see him and see his background before I talk about my experience. So with that, can you turn on the TV?
Maybe.
Pray, hope, and don't worry. A celebration of Padre Pio. On the 23rd of May, Pope John Paul came to pray and pay homage at the tomb of a man who has been called the greatest mystic of our century. A man who followed in the steps of St. Francis of Assisi, with whom he shared a nationality, a name, and a faith, and with whom he will perhaps share infinitely more. Because the man buried here surely deserved to join St. Francis in the company of saints. The Holy Father had come here to San Giovanni Rotondo twice before. He came when he was a simple priest from Rome and as a cardinal from Krakow. Today, he comes as Christ's vicar on earth. Padre Pio, baptized Francesco, shared one great mystical phenomenon with St. Francis of Assisi, the stigmata. The image of Christ in his passion, his bleeding body bearing the 5 wounds, his head lacerated by the crown of thorns. The 5 wounds, collectively known as the stigmata, have, on very rare occasions, appeared on the bodies of living people, and the Catholic Church has acknowledged previous manifestations of this kind. However, very few men have suffered the agony of the stigmata in the complete form of the 5 wounds, in the hands, the feet, and the side. The first was St. Francis of Assisi, and nearly 700 years later, the same wounds were borne by Padre Pio, the first priest to receive the wounds of Christ on the cross. Here, in the village of Pietrelcina, in the rugged south of Italy, he came into the world on May the 25th, 1887, in this small house. His parents, Grazio and Maria Forgione, had married in the nearby church of St. Anne. And it was here, in this church, that their son Francesco experienced one of his earliest direct encounters with God. As a child of 5, he had begun to experience ecstasies and also assaults from the devil. On one occasion, while quietly at prayer in St. Anne's, he had a vision of the Sacred Heart. He had already decided to offer his life to God and said that at that moment he felt hands upon his head, indicating that his offer had been accepted. One day, before setting off for America to find work in order to feed and educate his family, his father took him to a local shrine of St. Pellegrino. And there they witnessed a profoundly moving incident. The mother of a badly deformed child hurled her infant onto the altar, crying, "If you cannot heal him, you must keep him." The child sat up and ran to his mother's arms, completely healed. Grazio Forgione wanted to hurry his son away, but Francesco remained praying. Francesco Forgione began his religious training at Morcone and also attended several other Franciscan novitiates. He was ordained in the year 1910 when he was 23 years old in the Cathedral of Benevento. The young friar was often ill. He slipped into states of ecstasy which alarmed and worried his superiors. He fasted to extremes. He was subject to alarming temperatures, which were so high it is said they broke the thermometer. Concerned about his health, puzzled by his fevers, trances, and visions, the friars sent him back to his own village of Pietrelcina. He spent countless hours in this squat tower, the torretta, which his family owned, studying, praying, and in meditation. Sometimes he distanced himself for days and nights, staying in this lonely farm building in the midst of the countryside. Perhaps this long period of isolation from the life he had most hoped for was a preparation for the extraordinary years to follow. In September 1910, he had already begun to experience inexplicable pains in his hands. A year later, the young man wrote to his superior, Padre Benedetto, "Yesterday evening something happened which I can neither explain nor understand. In the center of the palms of my hands, a red patch appeared, accompanied by a sharp pain. I also feel some pain in the soles of my feet." Knowing full well what these pains foretold, he begged God to spare him the embarrassment, though not the pain, of the wounds. Apart from a brief spell in the Italian army in 1915, from which he was soon invalided out, he remained at his birthplace, Pietrelcina, where the villagers had now erected a small chapel, enclosing the tree under which he had first felt the pains of the stigmata. But in 1916, in the hope that the change of climate would cure his acute chest trouble, he was sent to the isolated and inaccessible Franciscan friary at San Giovanni Rotondo, a town of no interest then, a place of eager pilgrimage now. The early intimations of suffering were shortly to become something much more. Padre Pio was soon to suffer pains that he would gladly endure, but a notoriety that he found hard to live with. The full and terrifying appearance of the stigmata occurred on the morning of September the 20th, 1918. Padre Pio was in the choir of the old church in San Giovanni Rotondo, having celebrated Mass. He described what happened thus: "I yielded to a drowsiness similar to a sweet sleep, and during this I saw a mysterious person. His hands and feet and side were dripping with blood. This sight terrified me. the vision slowly disappeared, and I became aware that my hands, my feet, and my side were also dripping with blood. Padre Pio was 31 years old. Father Alessio was for a long time a close companion of Padre Pio and looked after him in his later years.
This is the place where Padre Pio received the stigmata on the 28th September 1918. From this letter here, you can see that Padre Pio was praying here when he saw this crucifix alive, dripping blood. And in that moment, Padre Pio felt an extraordinary peace inside of himself and outside. And during this time, Padre Pio always saw the crucifix alive, dripping blood. And he said that when he came out of this trance, I would say, he realized that his hands, his feet, and his side were pierced like the crucifix.
This is the very first photograph of his wounds. It was later witnessed by a notary. News of this astounding event slowly spread, and the ordinary people began coming to San Giovanni in large numbers to catch a glimpse of the stigmatized friar or to squeeze into the church to hear his mass. Understandably, perhaps, the attitude in the friary to the unique stigmatization of a young priest was one of extreme reservation. There was talk of transferring Padre Pio to another part of Italy, but the people of San Giovanni clamored for him to stay. There were even threats of violence. Eventually, something had to be done. A decision had to be made. Such notoriety can be an embarrassment rather than a blessing. In 1923, the Holy Office intervened with a series of measures. It declared that there were no signs of the supernatural in the case and ordered Padre Pio not to say Mass in public and to cease all written correspondence. When the decree was read to him, he said, "God's will be done." So began the years of seclusion, when Padre Pio became a priest without a congregation, a confessor unable to give absolution, a Christian without a spiritual director. He immersed himself totally in prayer and spiritual writing and reading, and wrote the words Resta con me. Stay with me, Lord. Thou knowest how thee I can forget. Stay with me, Lord. Thou knowest without thy strength I fall. Stay with me, Lord, for without thee my fervor fails. Stay with me, Lord. Thou art my light, thou art my life. Some time passed before the ban was lifted. Pope Pius XI, on further examination of the facts, permitted Padre Pio to resume his ministry. Eventually, a larger church had to be built to accommodate the huge congregations made up of people who came from all over the world. The flow of pilgrims began again with renewed fervor. They came then, and still they come. Padre Pio often spent 12 to 18 hours a day in the confessional. Even so, so many people came that a wait of 2 or even 3 weeks was not unusual for visitors who wished to be absolved by this charismatic figure, who always tried to keep his hands covered or hidden. He knew when people were wasting his time, when they had come for the wrong reasons, and occasionally terminated a confession abruptly with the word basta, enough.
He could read your mind, your soul, and when God gave him the light to see the soul of a person, Padre Pio really, would tell him or her the sins, And also, if sometimes they are not ready or they were not sincere in their confession, you will, send them away without absolution.
He was usually disarmingly simple and direct. Nothing could be more to the point than change your life. Or to someone who questioned the very existence of hell, you will believe it when you get there. He was capable, though, of remarkable insight, and there are many reports of his ability to read people's minds and their hearts, to know details of their lives and circumstances that he could not possibly even guess. Once, a woman was very surprised to be told that her penance, usually a prayer to be said in atonement for sin, was to go home and look in the well in her garden. As she did so, she saw the face of the son she had had aborted many years before. Joe Greco, now a great devotee of Padre Pio, met him in very unusual circumstances. After a dream in which he met Padre Pio on the road and asked him to save his father, Joe Greco's father suddenly recovered from a dangerous operation. Joe decided to go to San Giovanni to thank Padre Pio in person. He managed to get to confession after waiting 4 days.
This is what did it, really. When he saw me, he said, "Well, your father's all right, then." Well, it shattered me, really, because I'd never been down in San Giovanni Rotondo before. I'd never been down that part of the world. Neither did I know anyone down there. And yet, I posed in my mind a question to him. I was saying, "Was it you? Was it you?" And he replied, "In the dream. In the dream." Well, I started shaking. I was scared stiff, to tell you the truth. I said, "Yes, Father, in the dream, Father." I told him my sins, and he gave me before he gave me absolution, he said to me, "Now then, there is something else, you know." I says, "Well, Father," I said, "I can't remember anything else."
And Padre Pio went on to describe an incident with a girl in the park when he was first in the army.
Well, it all came back to me. I wished the ground had have opened up and swallowed me up. I was so embarrassed. Oh dear. I said, "Yes, Father, it all comes back to me, and I'm afraid I forgot to tell it in confession. So ashamed." Well, he said, "You've been carrying this sin around with you," he says, "ever since 1941. And the place was Blackburn, to tell you the truth." And I got up to go. Padre Pio said, "There is something else you've forgotten." And there was a slight smile on his face. I said, "Oh no, Father, truly there's nothing else that I can remember." I thought he was on about a sin, you know. And he said, "Look in your pocket." So I brought my rosary beads out. I gave them to him. He blessed them, and he gave them back to me. And that was it.
Those who knew Padre Pio talk with undying affection and admiration of a man who spent 50 years in extreme pain, for there is no doubt that he suffered real anguish from real wounds. The medical evidence of the stigmata supplied by doctors who examined Padre Pio over the years is impeccable. Dr. Luigi Romanelli, Dr. Giorgio Festa, and Padre Pio's personal physician, Dr. Sala, provided documentary evidence, as did many other independent medical experts, that the wounds were genuine and showed no signs of either healing or festering. Father Stefano is the superior of the Capuchin Friary at Pietrelcina, where they have a room devoted to the many relics of Padre Pio's life. Of all the mementos we have here, the most important is Padre Pio's nightshirt, which, as you can see, is stained with his blood. How did this happen? We know that Padre Pio experienced the whole of Christ's passion, the scourging, the crowning with thorns, the wounds of the stigmata, and that in his own words, the scourging occurred nearly every week over a period of many years. In spite of the continual pain, his contemporary, Padre Villani, once said, In the depths of his soul, he is the happiest man in the world. His attitude to life, in his own words, was always pray, hope, and don't worry. Anxiety does not help at all, he would say. The good Lord will listen to your prayers. And yet this man, who was like no other man, for many years of his life rose at 2:30 a.m., went to the sacristy at 4, said Mass at 5, a time decided after his period of rejection by Rome, when he had been ordered to say his Mass as early as possible, hoping to discourage large congregations. But still they crowded to this center of worship and waited for an hour or more, even in bad weather, for the door to open. As he pleaded with God to forgive his people, there were so many to be remembered, so much to offer, that his Mass could last for more than 2 hours. The stillness in the church was absolute. As he reenacted the passion and death of Christ, Padre Pio became a man of sorrows, offering himself with Jesus for the salvation of the world. An eyewitness says, as he turned to give the last blessing, the peace of Christ descended on all present, and one realized that God, in his love and mercy, had given us this man of suffering in our lifetime to reenact before our eyes the mystery of our salvation. It seems that because he offered to suffer like Christ before him to save souls, Padre Pio was granted what are known collectively as the gifts of the Spirit: bilocation, discernment, prophecy, conversion, healing, perfume, and language. Father Joseph Pius came to the friary many years ago as an American tourist to see Padre Pio. He stayed to become a Franciscan friar.
He actually understood languages he never knew. For instance, by the documented evidence in his life. For instance, after making me learn Italian when I didn't understand why, he spoke to me in perfect English 2 months before he died.
And had he not been known to speak in English before him?
He had been known to hear a confession in English, I think in 1927, but only that do I know about English. Then there's the story of the French prince who came and spoke with Father Pio privately for 15 minutes and marveled at how perfectly an Italian could speak and pronounce French.
The volume of his mail from all over the world was astounding. During the Second World War, he often gave families accurate reports on the fate of their menfolk who were away fighting. Many of his statements turned out to be prophetic. Father Peter Villani was brought up near San Giovanni, and his mother was a great admirer of Padre Pio. His father had emigrated to America to find work.
My mother, as usual, used to ask Padre Pio of everything she had to do. So even that time she went, and after her confession she said, "Father, my son is asking me to go and see him. Can I go? What do you think?" Oh, Padre Pio said, "Oh no, you can't." "Why I can't?" said my mother. "Why I can't?" Because she's thought something had happened to me. "So why I can't I see my son?" "Oh, well, you know, said Padre Pio, your husband is dying. My mother had a shock because she said the letters she received from the state was very good. Good health, good job, normal. So because Padre Pio said no, she didn't come. And in fact, the day when she was due to come and see me, she received a telegram from the state to say, yesterday your husband died from a mine coal accident.
Some of the most extraordinary stories are about his bilocation, that is, his apparent ability to be in two places at once, on occasion even to hold up the passage of time. Father Villani and his mother would frequently walk 12 kilometers to San Giovanni from their village to attend Padre Pio's Mass. One day, after Mass, while Padre Pio was taking off his vestments, a friar told her that the friary had no bread. So she went all the way back to San Marco on foot.
Collected the big loaf bread, about 6-7 kilos, and put it on her head like our women did when carrying things, and back to San Giovanni to find Padre Pio in the middle of getting off his mass vestments.
So, by an extension of the power of bilocation, his mother traveled all that distance in less time than Padre Pio needed to take off his vestments. After he received the stigmata, he never left San Giovanni Rotondo. Yet there is an army of witnesses to swear that they saw him in many different parts of the world. And since his death, people are still unexpectedly finding themselves in his presence. Padre Pio's appearances of this kind are usually to people in need. Peter Barrett, in the army at the end of the war, found himself in San Giovanni and went to confession to Padre Pio and subsequently served his Mass. Not long ago, in Greenwich Hospital, meeting the parents of a badly injured boy, he gave them a picture of Padre Pio and the message, pray, hope, and don't worry. 2 weeks later, he met the parents of the injured boy, and they told him that their son was being discharged, fit and well. The mother, very grateful, said,
She said, I wonder, she said, could you give that priest, she said, our sincere thanks that was with you. And I didn't want to embarrass her to say which priest, but I knew for a fact that I was on my own there. And she said, he was very like, she said, the priest on the picture that you showed me, she said. But she said, would you please give him our sincere thanks?
The priest she saw was, of course, Padre Pio. Margaret Neal recently had this experience in San Giovanni.
Our spiritual director on the pilgrimage, coming round giving each person the host. I saw him give my friend Kathleen the host, and then when he came to me, he just passed me, and I looked forward, and I saw this other priest walking forward with a chalice raised in his hand. I realized that it was Padre Pio himself who was giving me Holy Communion.
An American squadron leader claims that during the war, Padre Pio appeared before his plane in the sky above San Giovanni Rotondo and turned back the bombing raid. At the time, he had never even heard of Padre Pio and was only able to put a name to his vision when he saw Padre Pio in San Giovanni Rotondo several years later. Padre Pio was also reported to have been seen in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome on more than one occasion, and to have visited the dying Vicar General of the Diocese of Salto in Uruguay. Testimonies of his power of healing of minds, bodies and souls are too numerous to relate.
My name is Sean Mulrine. I come from Derry City. This is my wife Anne.
At this recent gathering in Ireland, Eileen Maguire talked about some of them.
We have instances that are not explainable, such as, for example, Sean and Anne Mulrine in Northern Ireland. Sean and Anne was expecting twins, and she had a very serious brain hemorrhage. And her husband prayed daily. Clinically, she was dead. She was placed on a life support machine. Her husband stayed at her side, continuously praying to Padre Pio. And on one occasion, the mitten was brought. Anne was blessed with the mitten of Padre Pio, and for the first time, after weeks on a life support machine, she moved her hands. And from there, perhaps Sean could continue to tell you the story.
So I went to see the surgeons, and they sat down, 3 of them, and they said to me, "Mr. Mulrine, the operation is over. It is, or it has been, our opinion, a miracle that we were able to keep your 2 unborn children inside your wife's womb while such a long and tedious operation went on."
She walked away from the hospital perfect and left her sticks behind her. And twins were born, and she is now mother of 4 children and perfect.
Vera Calandra, here seen at the foot of Padre Pio's statue in San Giovanni Rotondo, is a leading worker in the cause of Padre Pio in America, and she tells us how she came to invoke Padre Pio's help.
How he came into my life certainly was a gift from Providence, and I can look back now at the last 20 years, and we do wonder in the household how we would have been able to survive the crosses that have come our way without the assistance and the intervention of Padre Pio, because our daughter was at the brink of death. So after asking Padre Pio's intercession and sending a telegram here to the monastery, I actually had an experience in my home where Padre Pio asked me to come and to bring my little girl to him, but that I must not delay, that I would have to come immediately. There was always someone there to lend a helping hand. We saw Padre Pio, we were blessed by him, we were able to kiss his gloved hand, and we returned to the United States. My daughter showed tremendous improvement from that point on, and Padre Pio died just a couple of weeks afterwards. She is now called the Amazing Young Lady. She celebrated her 21st birthday just a matter of weeks ago. My daughter is alive every day, so I must do something each day in the name of Padre Pio. And that is when we talked about starting our own prayer group in my parish, and from the prayer group, with the demand of the people to know more about Padre Pio, is when we started our center, the office that would distribute literature throughout the United States.
But Padre Pio works in many ways. There are physical healings and there are spiritual healings. And Bella will fill you in on a spiritual healing.
10 months ago, we got word from Germany that my brother was very ill with cancer.
And she was even more worried to hear that he had given up the practice of his religion. She sent him leaflets with information on Padre Pio, together with scented rosary beads from San Giovanni.
My brother, I tried to talk to him in February about Padre Pio, and he got actually very angry with me. He told me I was a fanatic, and he said, if you want me to know anything about Padre Pio, tell him to give me direct contact. And I said, well, John, someday, if that's what you want, the Padre will do that for you. And I do believe that the Padre was with him when he died. I believe that. What we are saying, it was through the intercession of Padre Pio that my brother received the last rites of the church before he died.
Joe Greco also had great faith in the spiritual power of Padre Pio.
What are we going to do, Father, when you...
We'll cut off this video so I can talk about my experience, which is what you came with. So we wanted to run the video ahead of time so that you had some idea of what Padre Pio was all about. It started out 65 years ago, some years ago, when the Okay, sure. Put that to your shirt. Okay. When this priest from the diocese of Twin Cities wrote this book, and he came to our parish and talked about Padre Pio. He had spent a couple different long visits with Padre Pio. And so I got a book, and I was in high school at the time. So a couple of years later, I'm drafted in the Army. I'm being sent over to France. So I thought, well, I'll take the book along. Maybe I'll have an opportunity to go see Padre Pio. And that happened. I ended up in France in a sort of a bookkeeping role. But it was a function that I was cut out for. I was sent to a place that was stored. This was after the war, about 10 years after the World War II. That stored hospitals, field hospitals, in case the war broke out again. And I was sent there as a buck private to replace a master sergeant to do the bookkeeping or record keeping of the storage and upkeep of these hospitals. And one of the first things I observed was no pharmaceuticals were ever replaced in the hospital. So I took one of the hospitals, there were 7 of them, and I documented the pharmaceuticals and sent it to Washington, D.C., and with a request to let me know what pharmaceuticals should be replaced. As, they're 10 years old. And instead of getting a response in mail, a general shows up and looks at what I did, and he was amazed, and he gave me a promotion on the spot and authorized the redocumentation of all the hospitals on that basis. Well, that gave me, and I'm only mentioning this because it gave me some leverage and some privileges. And so my headquarters, well, Vassencourt, where I was 150 miles from Paris. The headquarters was in Fontainebleau, which is a suburb of Paris, kind of a resort area. And so I got to go back and forth to Fontainebleau quite a bit, and there, as a result, Paris. And one of my favorite spots in Paris was the Miraculous Medal Shrine. People think of the, all the other things like the Arc of Triumph and all that stuff that's in Paris. But the Miraculous Medal Shrine, where Our Lady appeared to I want to say now, Saint, well, it's not coming to me. But anyway, she's on display there in that shrine yet, so it's a very special place. But besides that, I went to Lourdes, and I went to Italy, and I went to Switzerland, I went to Germany and Belgium. So I got a lot of nice privileges. So towards the end of my stay in the Army, I decided to, well, by the way, I worked long hours. I also was on this small post with 1,000 GIs, I was the assistant to the pastor, so to speak, although we didn't have a priest on this post. There was only 1,000 GIs. And so we got a French priest on a weekend. So the other thing I was part-time librarian for the post. But I made a friend with another GI who was with the headquarters and who was Catholic, and we kind of decided, let's go see if we can go visit Padre Pio. Now, I had a problem. I had no leave left. That's vacation time. So here I am in less than 6 months, I'm being discharged from the Army, and I want to go make a week or 2 week long trip. And I didn't have any leave to do it, and going AWOL is not the right thing to do. So I talked to my captain, commander, and he authorized me to take off, go see Padre Pio. I think maybe Padre Pio had something to do with that, but I'm not sure. But anyway, we took off, and we joined a tour group that was going through Rome at the time, that was going to go with the Pope in the Meet the Pope, kind of Meet the Pope, with 500,000 other people in Easter Sunday. So we instead of going through Rome as our tour group was doing, visiting Rome, we took a detour and went down to Pietrelcina. Or no, actually we went to Pietrelcina was the home of Padre Pio, and I've been there a couple of times. But San Giovanni is where he was at that time. And I called the author of the book, Father Cardi, or I didn't call him, I wrote him, and he sent me a note, and I still got the note here. Maybe I don't have it right here, but that he sent back to me that told me what to do when I got to San Giovanni. Go see Mary Pyle, and she'll take care of you. So we did that, but we got to San Giovanni on Tuesday. This is Holy Week now. On Tuesday evening, so Wednesday morning, we went to his Mass at 5 o'clock. We went early. My goal was to see the wounds and get a good vision of the wounds. And so we got up real close. Now, what you got to understand, Mass was said, this is before Vatican II, so Mass was said with the priest facing away from the congregation, and at that time. So anyway, as we got into the church, all of a sudden the women, and I would say it's 95% of the people coming to his functions were women, came in, and they came in with their arms like this, forcing their way to the front. All of a sudden we found ourselves halfway back from the communion rail, and I had my buddy said to one of the couple nuns came by, which was a little different because they were visitors, and he said, go right on up to the altar, and the nun responded in English, saying, be careful what you say, because I'm from Switzerland and I speak English. So we decided that maybe instead of trying to stay close to the altar, we just go the other side of the room. Now, this is a small, some of the pictures you saw showed 2 churches built since I was there that first time. The second one was maybe 4 times as big. The chapel that we were in was maybe half the size of this room at that time. And so anyway, we went to the back side, which was fortunate, worked out. So many times, the things that you think are going wrong turn out to be going right. So anyway, well, we stood with everybody in front of us and no longer being pushed around for Mass. All of a sudden, Padre Pio shows up with his gloves on, and you couldn't see, but he took his gloves off as he approached at the altar and started his Mass. Now, his Mass took typically 2 hours, and that was without music, without communion. The communion he distributed after Mass, and without singing. and because he went into ecstasy, he went into sort of like froze and during the Mass. And he had another priest with him that apparently had the authority to move him on, to speak to him or speak to God. I don't know how he did it, but he would give him, okay, this is enough, move on. So he kept his Mass going. Now, when he got to the consecration, it was unique because, well, he was facing away from the congregation, and he put his hands high above his head with the host. And it appeared to me, from where I was standing, that he was frozen. He wasn't moving, and was going on. So after maybe 5 minutes or 10 minutes, he's up there with the host. I don't want to say I got bored, but I was looking for things to do, and I lined up along the post. I was doorway actually going to the friary on that side. I lined up with something on the back altar, and with Padre Pio in between. And I don't think he moved an eighth of an inch for as long as I was watching him. So when he came with the chalice now to do the same, I timed him. And then I watched him between. It was like shooting a rifle. I was trained to do that with the sights. And 20 minutes he was up with the chalice, not moving a fraction of an inch. And I was blown away. I mean, that couldn't happen. I didn't know how he could ever pull it off. You know, he was 69 years old at that time. Walking without cane or anything, in pretty good shape. So anyway, after Mass, then he put his gloves on, fingerless gloves, the fingers still showed, and he came back and distributed communion. Well, from there, we went over to see this Mary Pyle, which was next door. Mary Pyle is a very interesting person. She came with Madame Montessori to meet Padre Pio. Mary Pyle was Presbyterian, and Madame Montessori was her secretary and spoke a number of languages, so she came to San Giovanni and she met Padre Pio. But she didn't leave. Madame Montessori wasn't happy, I'm told, about that, but she converted and stayed with Padre Pio for the rest of her life. Now, Mary Pyle was wealthy New York gal from New York, and so she built this beautiful house. She took in Padre Pio's parents as they were getting old, and they passed on there, and so she was a great service to Padre Pio. Besides that, she played the organ, and she did some stuff in the choir and helped out, like, you know, with us. So she made arrangements with one of the friars at the monastery to take us and spend time with Padre Pio and so forth. So we met, she brought over, had come over, Father Dominic Meyer, who was from Wisconsin. And so he was there to service the Americans that showed up. And so we met Father Dominic, and he wanted to talk about the United States because, you know, he hadn't been there for a long time. Of course, I hadn't either, but I was a little more up to date. But he brought us up to date on Padre Pio and so forth. He says, "You want to meet him?" And I said, "Oh, that'd be great." And he says, "Well, meet me back here at 2 o'clock and in the hallway, and when he comes back into the chapel to hear confessions, you can meet him, and I'll be your interpreter." So we were back at 2 o'clock, and Padre Pio comes walking very gingerly on his feet. Of course, you could understand, and but he met another group in front of us, And then he came to us, and I didn't know what to expect. But Father Dominic introduced us as GIs, and he just cheered up. And he was very happy and gay, and I couldn't believe that, such a change. And it turns out he had a big thing for GIs. He, after World War II, for a number of years, the American troops were in Europe, and the local ones many of them became very close friends with them. So anyway, he asked a few questions, and the only word I understood because he was speaking in Italian, was when he said, when are you going back to America? America came out in Italian or English the same way. So that was the one word I understood that he said. But and then, of course, he blessed us, put his hands on our head and blessed us, and allowed to kiss his hands, again with the glove on. So I still am not seeing the wounds. So anyway, we went on from there. It was only like a 3-minute visit, but it was terrific. Well, we went on to we went on to meet another person that helped us, Ida Lucibella, who was a gal, and she had quite a story. I won't get into how she got there, and we toured the hospital. The hospital was a big deal. The hospital was complete. There were dynamiting holes in the granite or marble to plant trees around the hospital. The hospital was complete but not started yet. It was 5 weeks before its dedication. But I remember the operating room, particularly in the hospital, because it had huge windows on the north side to light up the place, and it was filled with operating tables and so forth. So, but what you should know, Padre Pio had this strong feeling for helping people. That's why he cured and helped in so many ways people that came to him. He usually found some way to help them, unless their intentions weren't good. And so his dream was to have this hospital built. And the way the dream was fulfilled was by American dollars after the war. And so he again was another connection with America. So we toured the hospital, a beautiful hospital. One time it was bigger than the Mayo Clinic, and he eventually gave it to the Vatican to take it over. So from there, Father Dominic also said, tomorrow we have Mass at 10 o'clock, which is very different. It's Holy Thursday. We only have one Mass, and so we can keep. I complained a little bit about being pushed around by the women, and so he said, you can be inside the communion rail, away from all the population, all the women. So I'll show you the way to the sacristy and where to stand, and you can watch Padre Pio Best and come out with him, and then you can be right at the foot of the altar, at the main altar now. And so we did this, that. So the next morning, we were there early, waiting, not too long, and Father Dominic showed up and just signaled, and then Padre Pio was there, and he vested, and so when he came out, we came out with him. And I think there was maybe some monks and a couple guys that were friends of Padre Pio, but there could have been as many as a dozen people inside the communion rail. So Mass was pretty much the same, but we had music now. But the big thing was communion was going to be served during Mass. And so I'm thinking, well, first of all, I wasn't from but closer than from here to the wall, away from him saying Mass, right at the foot of the altar. And so when he went up with the host, I'm down, my eye level is down here, and he's up a few steps there, and I'm looking up like that. And I tell you, when you're looking up like that for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, you get your neck gets sore. But anyway, I finally looked down, which was straight ahead. And what I noticed now, I'm looking at his foot level. He is elevated. He's not standing. I couldn't confirm that he was rigid like a statue because I had nothing rigid where I was standing, but he was above ground. I estimated at the time the width of my wrist. It's hard to remember that incident, but I remember the height he was off the ground was the thickness of my wrist. And so then, but it had not a big, by this time, it had no impact on me like when he would, yesterday, the day before, when he was rigid, like a statue. That came hard and unbelievable. When he was elevated, okay, by now I accepted it. And so now when it comes communion time, the first people who got communion, and by the way, everybody received communion on the tongue. So when he came around to give out communion, I was maybe the third person. I wasn't the first, I know that. And but I was right there before he went to the communion rail. And only the priest that had the services distributed communion. There was no help. But he had another priest with a paten or whatever they call it, put under your chin. And so when he came up to me, I'm focused on his hand, his sores. And the priest that was alongside him said something very loud, like, I don't know, but I think it was maybe open your mouth in Italian, because I was more focused on his sore but he might have said, get your act together. I don't know what he said, but it was Italian. But I think everybody in the church heard it, and it was quite embarrassing. But I got over it, as you can tell. But from there, that really pretty well completed our mission and so forth. That we spent the next day, Holy Friday, there, and Saturday morning we got on the train and went back to Rome and joined our group. Well, we did have a little experience on the train. And remember, I was 21 years old, and you do some dumb things once in a while. But anyway, I got on the train. I had a ticket for second class, or whatever it is, tourist class, but we got in the first class car. So the conductor came over and tried to tell us we're in the wrong car. But we didn't understand Italian. We knew what he was telling us, but we didn't understand Italian. So we set up a little goal to see how far we can get. And we made it to the outskirts of Rome. So we were pretty successful riding the first class car. Then we did eventually switch over to the tourist car. But anyway, that was my experience. So, question. Oh, by the way, we got kids and coins or pocket coins. Now, it's very important, the pocket coins. These have, pray, hope, and don't worry. The most famous saying of Padre Pio. But he has another one that I think should be on these instead. And that saying is, do good and you will be rewarded. And I think that's, I would like everybody to kind of remember that. Now, The other thing that I could mention, you got a little bit of Padre Pio, and maybe you can get more of his experiences. But the other thing that I think another saint, a couple more saints really that I like to mention, but St. John Paul II is very special because Padre Pio told him when he was a priest and he came that someday he was going to be Pope. So he gave him, but in St. John Paul II has told us another way of saying the Our Father. And now Jesus taught us the Our Father, and we should say the Our Father the way he taught it. But St. John Paul II says we should think about forgiveness and say, Our Father, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those that trespass against us. And abbreviated Our Father, a short one. Concentration on forgiving others. As you forgive others, I will forgive you. That's what we're asking for. So it seems wrong sometimes to say the Our Father that Jesus taught us differently, but this is really good to focus on. And that's one of the things John Paul II said. The other thing, the other saint, or will be saint, blessed presently, Solange Carey, was from here, from the background here, born in Hudson, worked in Prescott, worked in Hudson, worked in Stillwater, a couple of them, before he ever became a priest. And the one thing he was ordained, I gotta see, I still got a couple minutes, right? Okay. He was ordained a simplistic priest. Was not allowed to hear confessions or give sermons, but he became a doorkeeper, and in his administration in New York and largely in Detroit, Michigan. But he was famous for helping people that had problems. They'd come to him for advice. Now, he wasn't supposed to give advice, but advice. And usually they came to him for something, and he would pray for their wishes. And they come from miles and miles around. And his advice usually says, thank God in advance. And so it was simple advice. But someday, if you have the opportunity, try to learn more about, he will soon become a saint. And he may be, I think, the first American-born saint. His parents were born in Ireland. But anyway, now there's some other things I know I mentioned to Joe one day that I should. I don't know if you all have prayer books, but if you don't, it's still okay. You can get them. But in the prayer book, there's a picture on page 12 of Blessed Mother, Our Lady of Grace. There's also Blessed Mother up there. And I have a 1-second prayer. And how can you pass up a 1-second prayer? You look at the Blessed Mother and you give her a wink. Give her a wink. And that makes a great connection. That's my 1-second prayer. Now, I have another prayer. We're okay yet? That when you leave, I want you to practice at home. It's a 1-step prayer. 1-step prayer. When you come up, find your favorite chair in the house. Maybe it's a dining room chair. And you come up to it. Jesus, Mary, Joseph. That's Jesus, Mary, Joseph. The 1-step prayer. Now, you can't do any better than that. Jesus, Mary, Joseph. And right now, we got something happening in this country recognizing St. Joseph. But you know, Jesus, number one, Blessed Mother, number two, and St. Joseph, number three. Even though I may be big on Padre Pio and some other saints, St. Joseph is the top saint. He's the one. You know, I think of you, some of you homeschooled. St. Joseph was homeschooled. Jesus was homeschooled. St. Joseph was his teacher, and he did a pretty good job. So, but anyway, that was, and now in this booklet, there's a prayer of St. Francis in the prayer book. And that's one I like to look at too. St. Francis, it's all wrapped up, our Christianity, in the three last lines, thank you, of his prayer. In giving, you receive. In forgiving, you are forgiven. And in dying, you're born to eternal life. It's a paradox that in giving, you really receive. And in forgiving, you are forgiven. So remember that. Be forgiving. And then, of course, eventually, we come to the point where I'm just about at 87, but we'll have that eternal life. So anyway, so much for that. There's some more prayers but I think that's enough. But don't forget the 1 second prayer. That one's important. Any questions? I got. Pardon?
How old were you when Matthew?
21. 21.
And what year was it?
1956.
How far did Padre Pio go up in the air?
That far. That was my estimate at the time. And it's hard for me. And the other thing, by the way, that surprised me at the time, he had shoes on. Now, most of the priests had, and most of the pictures of Padre Pio with sandals, or I think it's sandals, these are wearing. And you see Padre Pio in those too. Now, it could be his feet were bleeding because it had to be bandaged. He had the wounds in his feet as well. But in that day, he had shoes on. So more questions?
Was there one thing that after you met him that you felt like you changed in your life? You did differently?
No, a dozen or so. Not one thing, but no, it was a big change. I was, okay before that, but even then, on the train ride back to, I was stealing my way in first class, So, but what really surprised me, and what you have to understand, Padre Pio's affection for America was tremendous, and it caught me by surprise there a little bit, because he wouldn't have gotten a seminary without his father going to the United States to work for years, and he'd be there 2 years at a time before coming home. He made a couple trips, so another thing about that his communication with his father during that period. His father didn't read or write, and his mother didn't read or write. They had to have someone else just write their letters. But Padre Pio, gradually, he was being tutored. So he gradually was able to read his father's letter from the United States. And then the GIs showing up big time. And then, it was, So he had a very closeness. And then, of course, the money for building, or the money to build his hospital, his dream, came from the United States for the most part. So
did Padre Pio come to America at all, did you say?
yeah, he did by bilocation quite a few times.
Because my girlfriend's dad, way back when he was probably 20, 21, was trying to discern if he should be a priest or if he should get married. And he was somewhere where St. Padre Pio was, and somehow got the chance to ask him. And he didn't know him from Adam, and St. Pio said, get married.
Okay.
And he did get married, and of course had family.
And it could have been, Padre Pio spent his entire life between only Pietrelcina, his home, and then San Giovanni Rotunda, where he was stationed. But he had lots of bilocation.
I'm thinking that now I'm going to ask her, I'm thinking he might have been overseas.
Yeah, he maybe went to San Giovanni.
Yeah.
And that would be good. But more questions? Anybody? Yeah.
What was he like?
He was happy when I was there. That's what he was, cheerful. Yeah, nice guy. Yeah.
The friend that went with you, what was his impression?
Well, I guess similar to mine. He was a great guy. He's passed away now, and but he was a great guy, and he was just a good friend. I drank whiskey. He drank wine. But anyway, when we traveled, but he was a great guy. Anything else? Anybody else? Anything? Yes.
Were you able to go to confession with Father?
No, but I did go to a confession with Father Dominic. Yeah, he offered it, and we did that. Yeah, but he was a great guy. I don't know where. It'd be interesting because he came from Racine, Wisconsin. So he was a nice guy too. So.
What is the book that you have, or can you still get it?
This book? Yeah. This book is still in print. I have a newer copy. This is the 5th edition. I think I have one like the 24th edition. And we might have one in the library. If not, I'll put one there. We'll find out. But it's this one's pretty well beat up. Yeah. And the new editions are really everything. They change a little tiny bit. Instead of being present tense, it's past tense. Reading it.
What's the name of the book, Dwayne?
It's Padre Pio de Stigmatis, and it's Father Cardi was the writer, and from St. Paul Diocese. This is a card that came while I was with Padre Pio. And I think I may have some other, this of course was from that was my directions to see Mary Pyle, and she even refers to Father Dominic Meyer in here. And so, well, good. Did we make it on time? Got 1 minute yet. One more question. Yes?
What did you do when you were in the Army?
I was a bookkeeper. I don't know what it is, but I was not very military. I went through the basic training and everything, but I was a record keeper and did, and I like to say it was the best 2 years of my life. My wife takes issue with that sometimes.
That must have been quite profound when you saw this living person elevated up.
I mean, that's Ken, really not. What was when he was a statue for 20 minutes, a statue with his hands up in the air. That's what got me. When he's elevated, he says, "Now I know why." Yeah, there was nothing to it. I mean, I needed some confirmation that he was able to do that physically himself. So it was, but no, and the video, it's good to see the videos because you see him, he went through a lot of suffering all the way through. This, we think of the wounds, the cross, but he had besides the crucifixion, he had the crowning of thorns and the scourging to the pillar and so forth, as you saw a little bit in that video. And he was persecuted by the Catholic Church. I hate to say that, but there was a lot of jealousy within the church because he was gifted with the wounds. And the local bishop, as an example, spread a lot of stories to Rome because he wanted to get that recognition. That's human beings at work. And then he was tortured by the church with all of his persecuting examinations and trying to cure the wounds and so forth, all that. You'll get more of that in the video. The other thing that is a big with him, he worked with his guardian angel. He talked to the Blessed Mother and Jesus, St. Francis. He had those communications, but his guardian angel was a big one. And he'd tell people, send your guardian angel to me and give me the message, what you want, if you can't come yourself. And that happened. There's a book here, and I'll leave this for you, strictly talking about his guardian angel connections with, but that's it. And I'll see about the book, if you don't have one in the library, to get that. And so, Joe, it's yours. Yeah.
That was wonderful. You're all invited to have coffee, hot chocolate. There's orange juice and water, and there's some cookies over there. Thank you all.